let's take a look at painting some metallic objects. First, since this one's kind of a study, I'm just sketching out the shape of the gravy boat thing before laying in any colors. So I'm just looking at the picture above, just want to make sure I can kind of replicate it enough to paint over. So now that I got the basic drawing done, I want to go in and lay down some flat color on a layer under the line work, just to kind of get all blocked in. You'll see me start to put down like just basic notes of color, no opacity right now, just flat color. Looking for the big contrasting colors here. We got some really bright values that are showing themselves close to white and some really dark ones. Kind of blocking them in where I see them really basically, really quickly. And then around this point too, I realized I want to keep painting in the lines. So I merged the layers and then I turned on lock transparency. So you see the little lock icon right next to the layer. So this means it's gonna, when you switch this on, it's gonna make it so you can't paint outside the pixels that you already painted. So it's really handy for making sure you don't accidentally go outside the lines. Forces your brushstrokes to stay within that, kind of like a mask. So right now I'm just looking at the image as reference, and I see that with metal in particular, I want to focus on its reflectivity and its wide value range. So it has some really bright values and some really dark ones. You can see towards the top, it's almost like pure white. And then same with the base of it, it's reflecting the light really well. So I'm just trying to capture the darks and lights in there. And that's kind of what's going to make it feel metallic in this case. So again, I'm just looking at the image, kind of putting in some of the side light that's rounding out the form, trying to make sure it's just describing the shape decently enough that we get the feel of this object. And we got to remember with metal, it's reflective. So it's going to be very shiny and you're going to see some of your environment in it. So if you look at the top of the reference image there, you can almost see, the objects in the background. So it depends how much you really want to push that. But metal in general can be almost like a mirror, depending on how rough or polished the surface is. So now we're going to take those ideas and we're going to apply them to a sphere. So I'm going to start off roughing in the same colors, and I want to try to keep the same range of values present that we did with the gravy boat. And so again, metallic objects tend to be very shiny and they have very tight and very bright highlights, depending on how polished the surface is. So here I'm doing a pretty polished surface. That's a pretty tight highlight. The more polished the material, the sharper and brighter the highlights are going to appear. And the rougher it is, will cause them to look a little more dull, kind of like how I just like move the highlights, spread it out a little more. Kind of want to add a little surface variance there, just make the surface a little more interesting, because rarely in the real world are you going to have a surface that's like super pristine. In this case, I'm putting in a little more of the reflected light, trying to bring back the bounce. Also, something to keep in mind with metal is that the highlights are going to reflect back whatever the color of the light source is. So in this case, we're just mocking it with like a white light. But whatever you have in the scene, if it's a blue or a red light, that highlight would reflect back the appropriate color. And there could easily be more than one highlight too, depending on the number of lights in the scene. So that's something to keep in mind whenever you're painting this in a scene. How many light sources are there, what color they are, how bright. It's all important to be able to render it in a convincing manner. Kind of finessing the bounce light a little more, get that feel to really round it off. And then again, just kind of distressing the highlight a bit so it's not like too perfect. Just makes it a little more interesting to me. some surfaces will have undulations, even slight ones will cause the highlight and values to kind of shift and look more interesting to your eye. And for the last example here, I'm going to do a kind of a cylindrical shape, kind of like the pipe reference up there. So we're going to be looking to that kind of for inspiration and see how the light is reflecting and bouncing off that and interacting with that. So again, we're focusing first on how sharp the values ramp up. The difference between the lights and the darks there can get pretty hot pretty quickly with metals here. As you see, I almost went all the way up to white immediately, and you have right next to it very dark colors and dark shapes. So the idea, again, we want to describe the form. In this case, it's a cylinder, so we're just trying to make sure it feels and reads like that when we look at it. And then again, I like adding little dings, little scratches, just to break up the surface a bit. Otherwise, it would kind of look not really believable. And so just by adding some marks and scratches and making sure they follow the same rules of like how the light's going to hit it with a highlight. In this case, we have the light a little bit above it, just to give the surface some interest. The important thing that we want to remember about metallic surfaces is that they're reflective. And the clarity of the reflection is going to depend on how rough the surface is. And it's because of that reflective quality that we get the range of values we do, and that we see them so wide. Again, to the point where it could even become mirror-like if it's smooth enough. A couple more touches, and there we go.